The great hall of the Voss pack had never been this quiet. Every wolf in the room stood frozen, eyes fixed on the woman kneeling at the center of the stone floor. Elena did not move. She kept her chin lifted, even though her hands were shaking at her sides. Damien Voss stood above her on the raised platform, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than anyone in the pack had ever seen them. He was their alpha, the strongest wolf in 3 territories, and the man who had chosen Elena as his mate only 2 years earlier. Now he looked at her as though she were a stranger who had wandered into his home uninvited. "Elena of the Voss pack," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You stand accused of giving pack secrets to the Ashcombe territory. You are accused of betraying your alpha, your pack, and your mate." A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Some wolves gasped. Others exchanged confused glances, unsure if they had heard him correctly. Elena, their Luna, a traitor? It seemed impossible. She had spent the last 2 years caring for injured pack members, organizing the harvest, sitting beside elders who had no family left. She was gentle, in a way that few Lunas before her had been. Elena looked up at Damien, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of the man who used to press his forehead to hers, and whisper that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. She found nothing. His expression was carved from stone. "Damien," she said quietly, "look at me. You know this isn't true. Do not speak my name as though we are equals," he snapped, and the sharpness in his voice made several pack members flinch. "I have proof, Elena. Letters, meetings, scouts who saw you near the border, speaking with Ashcombe wolves in the dead of night." "I went to the border because Ivy asked me to," Elena said, her voice breaking slightly, as she fought to stay calm. "Her sister lives in Ashcombe. I helped deliver medicine for her sick child. That is all. Ask Ivy. Ask anyone." Damien's beta, Callan Marsh, stepped forward from the shadows near the platform. He was a broad-shouldered wolf, with pale eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. He held up a leather folder, opening it slowly for dramatic effect. "I checked the story myself, Alpha," Callan said smoothly. "There is no sick child. There is no sister in Ashcombe. The Luna has been lying to us for months." Elena's stomach dropped. That was not true. She had met the woman herself, had held the sick child in her own arms. Someone had erased the evidence, or paid witnesses to deny it, or done something far more clever than she could untangle in this moment, in front of the entire pack, with her heart pounding so hard she could barely think. "He's lying," she said, turning back to Damien. "Callan is lying to you. I don't know why, but he is." "Careful," Damien said. "You accuse my most loyal beta of treachery, while you yourself stand accused of the same crime. Because it makes no sense any other way." Elena's voice rose now, desperation cracking through her composure. "I have never once betrayed this pack. I have never once betrayed you. Why would I? Why would I risk everything we have built together?" For a moment, just a moment, something shifted behind Damien's eyes. A flicker of the boy he used to be before the crown of Alpha settled so heavily on his shoulders, before every decision became a matter of pack survival, before trust became a luxury he could no longer afford. Elena saw it, and hope rushed through her chest like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then Callan spoke again, quiet and precise, as though he had rehearsed the words 100 times. "Alpha, might I remind you that Ashcombe has been circling our northern hunting grounds for weeks. Someone has been feeding them our patrol schedules. Someone with access to your private chambers, your maps, your meetings. Someone the guards would never question." The words landed exactly where Callan intended them to land. Damien's face hardened again, the flicker of doubt buried beneath a mountain of suspicion. "I did not want to believe it," Damien said, and his voice had gone cold, distant, the voice of an alpha, delivering judgment rather than a man speaking to the woman he loved. "I gave you every chance to explain yourself honestly. Instead, you offer me stories about sick children and sisters who do not exist." "They exist," Elena whispered. "I'm telling you the truth. The pack has rules, Elena. Rules that exist for a reason. A Luna who betrays her pack cannot remain among us, no matter what she once meant to her alpha." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. She pressed a hand against her stomach, an instinct she could not explain even to herself, though the truth was that she had known for 3 weeks now that she was carrying Damien's child. She had wanted to tell him privately, somewhere quiet, somewhere without an audience, somewhere she could watch his face soften into the joy she knew he would feel. She had been waiting for the right moment. She understood now, with a terrible clarity, that the moment would never come. "You are exiled," Damien said, effective immediately. "You will leave Voss territory before sundown, and you will not return. If you are found on our lands after tonight, you will be treated as an enemy of this pack." Gasps rippled through the hall again, louder this time. Even wolves who had never spoken a kind word to Elena looked uneasy, glancing at each other, some shaking their heads slightly, though none dared speak against their alpha. Exile was the harshest punishment a pack could hand down short of execution. It meant losing everything: territory, protection, family. It meant walking into a world where an unclaimed wolf, stripped of her title, was vulnerable to every predator, every rival pack, every danger the wilderness could offer. Elena rose to her feet slowly, refusing to let her legs shake in front of the crowd. She looked at Damien one final time, searching for any last trace of the man who had once promised to protect her with his life. "You will regret this," she said quietly. "Not because I wish harm on you, but because someday you will learn the truth, and by then, it will be far too late to take any of this back." Damien said nothing. He simply turned his face away, unable, or unwilling, to watch her walk out of the hall that had once been her home. Elena did not cry until she reached the edge of the territory, where the tall pines gave way to unfamiliar land. She stood there for a long moment, wind pulling at her hair, the last rays of sunlight slipping behind the mountains. Behind her lay everything she had known. Ahead of her lay nothing but uncertainty. She placed both hands over her stomach and closed her eyes. "I promise you," she whispered to the child she carried, "I will protect you, no matter what it costs me." She walked through the night without stopping, moving instinctively away from Vossland, away from the scent trails the enforcers might follow if Damien changed his mind and sent wolves after her. She did not know where she was going, she only knew she could not stay. By dawn, exhaustion had settled into every muscle of her body. Her feet ached, her chest burned with the effort of holding back tears that wanted to fall freely. She found a stream and knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands, drinking slowly, trying to steady the trembling that had not stopped since the moment Damien spoke the word exiled. A twig snapped behind her. Elena spun around, every instinct sharpening at once, ready to run or fight, whichever the moment demanded. A young wolf stood at the tree line, watching her with cautious eyes. He looked no older than 20, thin, with a scar along one eyebrow, and clothes that had clearly been mended many times. "You're not from around here," he said carefully. "No," Elena admitted. There was no point lying. Her scent alone would tell any wolf she did not belong to this land. "Voss territory is a day's walk that way." He nodded back the way she had come. "You're a long way from home." "I don't have a home anymore," Elena said, and the words tasted strange in her mouth, foreign, as though she were describing someone else's life. The young wolf studied her for a long moment, his eyes flicking briefly to her stomach, before returning to her face. Something in his expression softened. "There's a settlement not far from here," he said. "Not a pack exactly. More like a place for wolves, who don't belong anywhere else. Outcasts, runaways, people the world turned its back on." He hesitated. "You look like you could use somewhere to rest." Elena wanted to refuse. Every part of her wanted to insist she could manage on her own, that she did not need charity from strangers, that she would find her own way through whatever came next. But exhaustion won over pride, and the thought of the child growing inside her made refusal feel selfish in a way she could not ignore. "My name is Elena," she said. "Finn," the young wolf replied. "Come on, it's this way." The settlement, when they reached it an hour later, was nothing like Voss territory. There were no grand stone halls, no polished floors, no formal titles or rigid hierarchies. Instead, there were simple wooden cabins scattered among the trees, gardens tended by wolves of all ages, and an atmosphere that felt, despite its roughness, strangely peaceful. An older woman named Marjorie, who seemed to serve as something like a leader, without ever claiming the title, welcomed Elena with a warmth that nearly broke the last of her composure. "You'll stay as long as you need," Marjorie said simply, studying Elena's tired face and trembling hands with quiet understanding. "We don't ask questions here about where people come from. only about where they're going. That night, lying on a simple cot in a cabin that smelled of pine and wood smoke, Elena finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for the pack she had lost, for the mate who had condemned her without a fair hearing, for the life she had imagined and would now never have. But beneath the grief, something else began to take root. A fierce, quiet determination that grew stronger with every breath. She would survive this. She would raise her child in safety, far from the cruelty and politics that had destroyed her life in a single evening. And someday, she promised herself, the truth would come out. Someday, Damien Voss would understand exactly what he had thrown away. She did not know it yet, but her child would be too. Twins, growing inside her even now, sharing her blood and her strength and, though neither of them would ever meet him as children, their father's fierce and stubborn nature as well. Outside the cabin, the wind moved through the trees, carrying her scent further and further from the only home she had ever known. Elena closed her eyes, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, and allowed herself, for the first time in a very long day, to hope. Whatever came next, she would face it, and she would not face it alone. Morning came slowly through the gaps in the wooden shutters. Elena woke to the sound of birds and the distant clatter of someone chopping wood. For one confused moment, still caught between sleep and waking, she reached for the warmth that used to lie beside her, the familiar presence of Damien's arm, draped across her waist. Her hand found only empty blankets, and the memory of the night before crashed back into her all at once. She sat up slowly, pressing her palms against her eyes. She would not spend today crying. She had done enough of that already, and crying would not fill her stomach or keep her child safe. She needed to think clearly now, the way she had always thought clearly, even in moments when everyone around her lost their heads. Marjorie found her sitting outside the cabin an hour later, watching the settlement come to life around her. Children ran between the trees, chasing each other, with the easy laughter of those who did not yet understand how cruel the world could be. An older man sharpened tools near a workbench. Two young women carried baskets of vegetables toward a communal kitchen, built from mismatched wood and stone. "You're up early," Marjorie said, settling onto the bench beside her with a soft groan, the kind that came from old bones rather than complaint. "I couldn't sleep much longer," Elena admitted. "That tends to happen, the first few nights in a new place, especially after—" Marjorie paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, after whatever brought you here." Elena said nothing for a long moment, watching the children play. She thought about how easily her own life had unraveled, how quickly 2 years of trust could be dismantled by a handful of lies, and a beta with an agenda she still did not fully understand. "My mate accused me of betraying our pack," she finally said. "He believed a lie over the truth. He exiled me in front of everyone I knew." Marjorie's expression did not change, though something in her eyes grew heavier, more knowing. "That kind of pain doesn't heal quickly, but I've seen worse walk through these woods and come out the other side standing taller than before." "I'm carrying his children," Elena said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "He doesn't know. I never had the chance to tell him." For the first time, Marjorie looked genuinely surprised. She studied Elena's face, then glanced briefly at her stomach, understanding settling over her features. "Then you have more reason than most to build a good life here. Whatever happened between you and your mate, that child deserves a mother who is strong, and safe, and free." "Children," Elena corrected softly, though she could not have explained how she knew. It was simply a certainty that had settled into her bones over the past few weeks, a quiet knowing that felt as real as her own heartbeat. "I think there are two." Marjorie smiled, the first real smile Elena had seen since arriving. "Twins carry double the strength, in my experience. Whatever pack you came from, whatever cruelty drove you out, those children will grow up surrounded by people who value kindness over politics. That's more than some pups get, even in the grandest of packs." Over the following days, Elena settled slowly into the rhythms of the outcast settlement. She learned to tend the gardens, to cook over an open fire, to mend torn clothing with careful stitches. The work was humble, nothing like the responsibilities of a Luna, but there was a strange comfort in it. No one here judged her by the title she had lost. No one whispered behind her back about betrayal or treachery. She was simply Elena, a woman finding her footing in a difficult world, same as everyone else who called this place home. Finn, the young wolf who had found her by the stream, checked on her often, bringing extra blankets or offering to carry water so she would not strain herself. He never asked about her past, though she suspected Marjorie had told him at least part of the story. His quiet kindness reminded her, painfully, of the way Damien used to be, before the weight of leadership hardened him into someone she barely recognized by the end. She thought of Damien constantly during those first weeks, despite every effort to push him from her mind. She thought of the way he used to laugh, rare and unguarded, before the responsibilities of the pack stole that laughter away one meeting at a time. She thought of the night he had chosen her as his mate, kneeling before the entire pack with a nervousness that had seemed impossible for a wolf as powerful and controlled as him. She thought of his hands, gentle despite their strength, and the way he used to trace patterns along her spine when neither of them could sleep. And then she thought of his face in the great hall, cold and closed, delivering her exile as though she were nothing more than a stranger who had wronged him. The contrast between those two men, the one she had loved and the one who had condemned her, felt like a wound that refused to close. "You're thinking about him again," Marjorie observed one evening, finding Elena staring into the fire long after the others had gone to sleep. "I can't seem to stop," Elena admitted. "That's normal, dear. Doesn't mean you forgive him. Doesn't mean you owe him anything. It just means you loved someone, and love doesn't disappear the moment it's convenient for it to." "He should have trusted me," Elena said, her voice tight with an anger she had been suppressing for weeks. "After everything we built together, he looked at me like I was a stranger." "Someone worked very hard to make him believe that," Marjorie said gently. "From what you've told me, this beta of his sounds like a wolf with his own reasons for wanting you gone. Men like that don't act without purpose. Someday, if the universe has any fairness left in it, that purpose will come to light." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the first faint flutter of movement in her stomach, so small she almost missed it. She pressed a hand against the spot, breath catching. "They're strong already," she whispered, more to herself than to Marjorie. "Good," Marjorie said, patting her shoulder as she rose to retire for the night. "They're going to need to be." Weeks passed into months. Elena's body changed, her strength tested by the demands of carrying two lives at once, but she refused to let herself grow weak or dependent. She trained lightly when her body allowed it, kept her mind sharp by helping Marjorie manage the settlement's simple affairs, and slowly, painstakingly, began to rebuild something that resembled peace. She thought less of the throne she had lost, and more of the future waiting for her children. She would not raise them to crave power or crowns. She would raise them to be strong enough that no one could ever strip everything from them with nothing but a handful of lies and a cruel accusation. She would raise them to know their own worth so completely that no alpha, no pack, no throne could ever convince them otherwise. Late one night, as autumn wind rattled the shutters and the first hint of winter crept into the air, Elena felt a sharp pain low in her stomach and knew, with sudden certainty, that her children were ready to meet the world. She did not scream for Damien. She did not wish, even for a moment, that he stood beside her. She called for Marjorie, and for Finn, and for the small found family that had wrapped itself around her broken life, and slowly, patiently, helped her mend it back together. By the time the sun rose over the settlement, two small, healthy boys lay wrapped in blankets against her chest, their tiny hearts beating strong and fierce, already carrying within them the strength of two powerful bloodlines neither of them would understand for many years to come. Elena looked down at her sons, and felt something inside her settle, quiet and certain, like a promise finally taking root. "Kale," she whispered, touching the first boy's forehead, and Ronan. She touched the second. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and distant smoke toward the mountains, toward Voss territory, toward a father who did not yet know his sons existed and would not learn the truth for many years still to come. Marjorie held one twin while Finn carefully held the other, both of them smiling down at the boys, as if they were something precious the whole settlement had been waiting for. In a way, they were. New life had a way of reminding hardened, weary people why survival still mattered. "They have your eyes," Marjorie said softly. "And his stubbornness, I imagine," Elena replied, a tired but genuine smile finally breaking through the exhaustion on her face. "I could feel it the whole time I carried them. Two little storms, refusing to be calm even before they were born. Finn laughed quietly. Storms grow into something powerful, given time. Elena looked down at her sons, at the tiny fists already curling and uncurling, as though testing their own strength, and felt the last hard knot of grief in her chest loosen just slightly. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if Damien would ever learn the truth, or if the truth would even matter to him after everything that had happened. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that these two boys would grow up loved, protected, and strong enough to face whatever the world eventually asked of them. Whatever throne waited for them, whatever legacy they carried in their blood, that was a question for another day. Tonight, there was only this: two new heartbeats, steady and sure, beginning their story in a small wooden cabin, far from the grand halls of Voss territory, surrounded by people who had chosen them long before the world ever would. 5 years passed in the settlement, and with them came a version of peace Elena had never expected to find again. Kale and Ronan grew from fragile newborns into quick, curious boys who filled the small wooden cabin with noise and laughter, from sunrise until long after they should have been asleep. They were nearly identical in appearance, both with Elena's dark hair and sharp green eyes, though Kale carried a fierce protective streak even at 5 years old, while Ronan tended to watch first and act second, patient in a way that reminded Elena, uncomfortably, of his father. She never spoke of Damien to her sons. There was no reason to burden two small boys with the weight of a betrayal they had not caused and could not understand. As far as Kale and Ronan knew, they had no father, only a mother who loved them fiercely, and a settlement full of people who treated them like family. That peace ended on an ordinary afternoon in early summer, when Finn came sprinting through the trees, breathless, his face pale with alarm. "Elena," he called, skidding to a stop in front of her garden. "Scouts, 2 of them, at the northern edge of the settlement. They're not from around here." Elena's blood ran cold. She had spent 5 years telling herself that Voss territory was far enough away, that Damien had no reason to search for a mate he believed guilty of betrayal, that her sons were safe in this quiet corner of the world. But Pax sent scouts for many reasons, and not all of them were kind. "Did they see the boys?" she asked, already moving toward the cabin where Kale and Ronan were playing. "I don't think so. They were asking questions in the market village, about unclaimed wolves living in these woods. Marjorie sent me to warn you." Elena gathered her sons quickly, pulling them close despite their protests, her mind racing through every possibility. If the scouts belonged to Ashcombe, the territory she had been falsely accused of aiding all those years ago, then perhaps they were simply passing through, unconnected to her past entirely. But if they came from Voss lands, sent by Callan Marsh or some other wolf loyal to Damien, then her son's safety depended entirely on staying hidden. "Mama, why are you scared?" Kale asked, tugging at her sleeve. His young face creased with the particular worry that children develop when they sense danger they cannot name. "I'm not scared," Elena lied gently, forcing calm into her voice even as her heart pounded. "I just want us to stay close to home today. Can you do that for me?" Kale nodded solemnly, though Ronan, quieter and more observant, studied her face with an expression far too knowing for a 5-year-old. That night, after the boys had finally fallen asleep, Elena sat with Marjorie outside the cabin, watching the tree line for any sign of movement. "The scouts left by evening," Marjorie said, her voice low. "Didn't seem interested in staying. But it's a reminder, Elena. This settlement isn't invisible. Sooner or later, word travels." "I know," Elena admitted. "I've always known this peace couldn't last forever. I just hoped it would last longer than 5 years. Your sons are growing stronger every day. Stronger than most wolves twice their age, if I'm being honest. There's something in them, some inheritance neither of us can name, that sets them apart from other children here." Marjorie hesitated. "You've never told them who their father is." "I don't know how to," Elena said quietly. "How do I explain that their father condemned me in front of an entire pack? How do I explain that somewhere out there, they have a birthright neither of us can claim, a throne built on lies that stole everything from us?" "You don't have to explain everything today," Marjorie said. "But someday, Elena, they will ask. And when they do, they deserve the truth. All of it. Even the parts that hurt." Elena said nothing, staring out at the dark tree line where scouts had passed through only hours earlier, carrying whispers of her existence back toward territories she had spent 5 years trying to escape. Over the following years, Elena trained her sons carefully, teaching them to fight not out of aggression, but out of necessity, preparing them for a world that had already proven itself cruel and unpredictable. Kale took to the training with fierce enthusiasm, pushing himself harder than any instructor demanded, driven by an instinct to protect that seemed to grow stronger with every passing year. Ronan approached the same lessons with quiet precision, studying every movement, learning not just how to fight but why, understanding strategy in a way that impressed even the settlement's most experienced fighters. By the time the twins turned 10, they had already surpassed most of the settlement's young wolves in both strength and skill, a fact that worried Elena more than it comforted her. Extraordinary children drew attention, and attention was the one thing her sons could not afford. "They ask about their father more now," Elena confided in Marjorie one evening, watching Kale and Ronan spar in the clearing beyond the cabin, their movements sharp and coordinated in a way that seemed almost unnatural for boys their age. Ronan especially. He notices things. "He knows there are parts of our story I haven't told him." "What do you tell them?" "That their father made a terrible mistake, and that mistake cost us everything. I haven't told them his name. I haven't told them about Voss territory, or the throne, or any of it." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, watching her sons with a mixture of pride and dread. "I don't know if I'm protecting them, or simply delaying the inevitable." "Perhaps a little of both," Marjorie said gently. "But Elena, look at them. Really look. They're not fragile children who need shielding from every hard truth. They're growing into something powerful, something the world will notice, whether you tell them the truth or not. Better they hear it from you, on your terms, than discover it some other way." Elena knew Marjorie was right, though the knowledge did little to ease the fear that had settled permanently in her chest since the scouts first appeared at the settlement's edge. She thought of Damien often during those years, wondering if he ever thought of her in return, wondering if guilt had ever crept into the certainty that had allowed him to cast her out so easily. She wondered if he had claimed a new Luna, if he had forgotten her entirely, if the throne she had once shared with him now belonged to someone else's memory. She did not yet know that Damien had claimed no one else. She did not know that guilt had, in fact, found him, slow and persistent, growing heavier with each passing year, despite every effort to bury it beneath the demands of leadership. She did not know that Callan Marsh's influence over the pack had grown unchecked in her absence, twisting decisions and policies in ways that served his own ambitions, far more than the pack's well-being. All Elena knew, standing in the golden light of a summer evening, watching her sons train with a ferocity that seemed to belong to warriors twice their age, was that the peace she had built for them was fragile, temporary, and shrinking with every year that passed. Somewhere beyond these trees, a throne waited, and though neither Kale nor Ronan understood it yet, that throne was theirs by blood, whether the world was ready for them to claim it or not. The truth arrived sooner than Elena had planned, though not in the way she expected. It happened on a cold afternoon when the twins were 12, during one of their rare trips beyond the settlement's borders to trade furs at the market village nearby. Elena allowed the trips occasionally now, trusting her son's growing strength to keep them safe, though she always insisted Finn accompany them as an extra precaution. That day, a traveling merchant recognized something in Kale's face that made him stop mid-sentence, staring with an expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. "You," the merchant said slowly, studying Kale's sharp jaw and the particular shade of green in his eyes. "You look exactly like Alpha Voss. I traded with his territory for years, before the border troubles started. I'd know that face anywhere." Kale frowned, confused. "I don't know who that is." The merchant glanced between Kale and Ronan, noticing for the first time that they were twins, his confusion deepening into something closer to alarm. "Voss territory, north of here. Powerful pack. The Alpha. He's had no heir in all these years, not since his Luna was exiled. Strange that two boys who look so much like him would appear from nowhere." Finn stepped in quickly, ushering the twins away from the stall with practiced ease, offering some excuse about needing to return before dark, but the damage, small as it seemed in the moment, had already been done. Both boys walked home in unusual silence, the merchant's words settling into their minds like stones dropped into still water. That night, Ronan found his mother sitting alone by the fire, and for the first time in his young life, He did not simply accept the silence she offered in place of answers. "Mama," he said quietly, sitting down beside her. "The merchant today. He said we look like an alpha. He said this alpha's Luna was exiled." Ronan's green eyes, so much like her own, searched her face with a directness that made her chest ache. "Is that you? Were you exiled?" Elena closed her eyes briefly, feeling 12 years of careful silence begin to crumble beneath the weight of a truth she could no longer postpone. Cale appeared in the doorway a moment later, drawn by the seriousness in his brother's voice, and stood listening without a word. "Yes," Elena finally said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "I was exiled from Voss territory 12 years ago, while I was carrying both of you." "Why?" Cale asked, his voice sharper than his brother's, already carrying the fierce protectiveness that defined him. "Because your father believed a lie," Elena said. "Someone convinced him I had betrayed our pack. I hadn't, but he chose to believe the lie instead of trusting me, and he cast me out in front of everyone we knew." The silence that followed stretched long and heavy. Ronan stared into the fire, processing the information with the same quiet precision he brought to everything else. Cale's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides, anger flashing hot and immediate across his young face. "He's our father," Cale said slowly, testing the word as though it tasted foreign in his mouth. "The Alpha of Voss territory is our father." "Yes," Elena said again. "And he never came looking for us," Ronan said, not quite a question. "He didn't know I was pregnant when he exiled me. I never had the chance to tell him." Elena reached out, resting a hand on each of her son's shoulders, needing them to understand the full weight of what she was about to say. "I don't tell you this to make you hate him. I tell you because you deserve the truth, and because someday, if either of you chooses to seek him out, I want you to understand exactly what happened, without illusions, without half-truths." "Do you hate him?" Ronan asked quietly. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I hated him for a long time. Now, mostly, I feel sorry for him. He lost everything that mattered, because he trusted the wrong person and doubted the right one. That's its own kind of punishment, even if he never faces mine." Cale did not look satisfied with that answer, his young mind already turning towards something fiercer, something closer to justice than forgiveness. But he said nothing more that night, simply nodding once before retreating to the small room he shared with his brother, leaving Elena alone by the fire with the weight of a secret finally spoken aloud. Over the following years, the knowledge of their true heritage settled differently into each twin. Ronan grew quietly determined, studying everything he could learn about pack law, about leadership, about the politics that had destroyed his mother's life, as though understanding the system might someday allow him to dismantle it fairly. Cale grew fiercer, training harder than ever, driven by a need to become strong enough that no one could ever do to him, or to his mother, what had been done 17 years before he even suggested the number aloud. By the time the twins reached their late teenage years, they had become something the settlement had never seen before, wolves of extraordinary strength and discipline, carrying within them the combined bloodlines of two powerful lines neither territory had ever intended to merge. Word of their existence, despite Elena's best efforts, had begun to travel further than she wanted to admit, carried by merchants and travelers who could not resist mentioning the two remarkable young wolves living among the outcasts near the northern woods. Elena knew, with the same certainty that had carried her through childbirth alone in a stranger's cabin 17 years earlier, that the quiet peace she had built for her sons was drawing to its inevitable end. The world beyond the settlement had already begun to notice Cale and Ronan. It was only a matter of time before that world, and the throne it circled, noticed them too. 17 years is a long time to carry guilt, though Damien Voss had never allowed himself to name it as guilt. He called it vigilance instead, told himself that the coldness settling deeper into his chest each year was simply the weight of leadership, the price every alpha eventually paid for holding a pack together through difficult seasons. He did not allow himself to think of Elena often. When her memory surfaced anyway, unbidden, in the quiet hours before dawn, he pushed it down with the same discipline he applied to every other weakness. The Voss pack he now led bore little resemblance to the pack he had inherited from his father. Trade routes had shifted, alliances had frayed. And Callan Marsh, once a trusted beta, had become something closer to a shadow ruler, his influence woven so thoroughly through the pack's daily operations that few decisions moved forward without his approval, spoken or otherwise. Damien told himself this arrangement made sense, that a leader needed someone he could rely on, absolutely, especially after the loss he still refused to name. He did not see the way pack members lowered their eyes when Callan passed. He did not notice how many decisions Callan made in his name during the long stretches when Damien withdrew into himself, exhausted by a grief he would not acknowledge even to his own reflection. He did not question why so many of the wolves who had once spoken up loudly in pack meetings had grown quiet over the years, or why dissent, once a healthy part of pack governance, had all but disappeared from Voss territory. He noticed none of it, until the night Nora Bell sent for him. Nora had served the pack for over 3 decades, first as a healer, later as an advisor whose steady wisdom had guided 3 generations of Voss leadership. She was old now, her body failing faster than her mind, and when word reached Damien that she wished to see him urgently, he went immediately, sensing something in the message that unsettled him deeply. He found her in a small cottage near the edge of the healing quarters, propped up against pillows, her breathing labored but her eyes sharp with an urgency that cut through Damien's usual composure the moment he entered the room. "Alpha," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I should have spoken years ago. I let fear keep me silent for far too long. Nora, save your strength. Whatever this is, it can wait until—" "It cannot wait," she interrupted, her hand gripping his wrist with surprising force. "I am dying, Damien. I feel it in my bones. And I will not carry this into my grave." Something in her tone silenced him completely. He sat beside her bed, giving her his full attention, an old habit of respect he had never lost, for the woman who had helped raise him after his own mother passed. "The letters," Nora said. "The ones used to condemn Elena, all those years ago. I never believed they were real. I suspected, even then, that something was wrong with them, but I said nothing, because Callan made it clear that questioning him would not be tolerated." Damien's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I helped him," Nora whispered, tears gathering in her tired eyes. "Not knowingly, not at first. He asked me to copy certain documents, told me they were routine pack records. I didn't realize until much later that those documents became the foundation of the case against Elena. By the time I understood what I had done, she was already gone, and I was too afraid of Callan's influence to speak against him." The room seemed to tilt around Damien, the walls pressing inward, the years of carefully constructed certainty crumbling beneath a truth he had never allowed himself to seriously consider. "You're saying the evidence against Elena was fabricated," he said slowly, forcing the words out through a throat that had gone painfully tight. "I'm saying I believe Callan Marsh orchestrated her downfall from the beginning," Nora said. "I don't know his full reasons. Power, perhaps, resentment. He always resented how quickly you rose to alpha, how thoroughly the pack trusted you. Removing Elena weakened you in ways that benefited him for years afterward. I should have spoken sooner. I should have found the courage. Instead, I let an innocent woman lose everything while I stayed silent, and I have hated myself for it every single day since." Damien sat frozen, unable to speak, memories crashing through him with a violence that stole the air from his lungs. Elena's face in the great hall, pale and desperate, insisting she had done nothing wrong. Elena's voice, breaking as she begged him to look at her, to trust her, to remember everything they had built together. He had chosen Callan's fabricated evidence over the woman who had shared his bed, his heart, his life, for 2 years. He had chosen it in an instant, without hesitation, because doubting Callan had never once crossed his mind. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Nora admitted. "No one has heard from her since the night of her exile. She simply vanished, and given the danger and unclaimed wolf faces in unfamiliar territory, I feared the worst for many years." Damien rose from the chair so abruptly it toppled backward, his mind racing through 17 years of decisions made in Elena's absence, 17 years of Callan's growing influence, 17 years of guilt he had refused to properly examine, because examining it would have required admitting he had destroyed the one thing that ever truly mattered to him. "Thank you for telling me," he said, though the words felt hollow against the enormity of what he now understood. "You should have told me years ago, Nora, but thank you." "Find her, Damien," Nora said weakly, as he moved toward the door. "If she's still alive, find her, and make right what should never have gone so wrong in the first place." Damien did not sleep that night. He paced the length of his chambers for hours, replaying the trial in the great hall over and over, searching every memory for signs he had missed, moments where doubt should have overridden his trust in Callan, and never did. By the time dawn broke over Voss territory, he had made a decision that would upend everything he thought he understood about his own pack. He summoned Callan to his private study, watching carefully as his beta entered with the same easy confidence he always carried, the confidence of a wolf who had spent 17 years believing himself untouchable. "Alpha," Callan said, inclining his head slightly, "you wish to see me?" "I spoke with Nora Bell last night," Damien said, keeping his voice deliberately flat, giving nothing away. Something flickered behind Callan's pale eyes, brief and controlled, but Damien had spent years learning to read the subtle shifts of powerful wolves, and he did not miss it. "I hope she is well," Callan said carefully. "She told me about the letters," Damien said. "The ones used against Elena. She told me you asked her to copy documents that became the foundation for Elena's exile." The silence that followed stretched long enough to confirm everything Damien needed to know, even before Callan finally spoke. "Alpha, I acted in the pack's best interest. Elena was a liability, a distraction from your responsibilities. I did what I believed necessary to protect this territory." "You destroyed an innocent woman's life," Damien said, his voice rising despite every effort at control. "You destroyed my life. 17 years, Callan. 17 years I lived believing she betrayed me, when in reality, you were the one betraying this pack all along." "Careful, Alpha," Callan said, and something colder entered his voice now, something that had been hiding beneath the surface for 17 patient years. "You are angry, and understandably so, but before you act rashly, consider how much of this pack's stability depends on the arrangements I have carefully maintained. Consider how many wolves owe their positions, their comfort, their safety, to decisions I have made in your absence." Damien felt something in his chest, turn to ice. "Are you threatening me?" "I am reminding you," Callan said smoothly, "that removing me will not be as simple as you imagine. I have built alliances within this pack that run deeper than you realize. Tread carefully, Damien, for both our sakes." Damien stared at his beta, at the wolf he had trusted implicitly for nearly 2 decades, and felt the full weight of his own failure settle over him like a physical burden. He had been so certain of Callan's loyalty that he had never once questioned the ease with which Elena's guilt had been proven. He had let his trust in one man cost him everything that mattered in his life. "Get out of my sight," Damien said quietly, "before I do something we will both regret." Callan left without another word, though the look he cast over his shoulder before closing the door carried a warning Damien understood clearly. This was not finished. Whatever alliances Callan had built during his years of unchecked influence would not dissolve simply because the truth had finally surfaced. Damien stood alone in his study long after Callan's footsteps faded down the corridor, staring out the window toward the northern woods, toward territories he had never bothered searching in 17 years of willful blindness. Somewhere out there, if Nora's fears proved unfounded, Elena might still be alive. And if she had carried his child the night he condemned her, as her final words in the great hall had hinted without his understanding, then somewhere out there, he might have a child he knew nothing about, growing up believing their father had betrayed them before they ever drew their first breath. He would find her. Whatever it cost him, whatever alliances Callan had built against him, whatever danger waited in the search, Damien would find Elena and make right what should never have gone so wrong in the first place. He only hoped, standing alone in the growing light of morning, that 17 years had not made forgiveness an impossible thing to ask for. Far to the north, unaware that the truth had finally begun surfacing within Voss territory, Kale and Ronan sat together on a hillside, overlooking the settlement that had raised them, watching the sun set behind mountains that had sheltered their mother's exile for nearly 2 decades. "I've made a decision," Kale said quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Ronan did not need to ask what decision his brother meant. They had spent the last year discussing it in careful, circling conversations, neither quite ready to speak the plan aloud until now. "We go to Voss territory," Ronan said, not a question. "We go," Kale confirmed, "not to beg for a father's love we were never given, not to ask permission to exist. We go to claim what's ours by blood, and to make sure no one ever does to our mother what was done to her 17 years ago." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of what his brother proposed. "Mother will try to stop us. Mother has spent 17 years protecting us from a world that never had the chance to know us," Kale said. "It's time the world learned exactly what it's dealing with." Below them, the settlement's evening fires began to flicker to life, small points of warmth against the gathering dusk. Somewhere among those fires, their mother moved through the familiar rhythms of a life she had built from nothing, unaware that her sons had finally decided the quiet peace of their childhood was about to give way to something far more dangerous, far more consequential, and utterly unstoppable. News of Damien's confrontation with Callan spread through Voss territory within a single day, whispered between pack members who had spent 17 years too afraid to question the beta's growing authority. Some wolves felt a cautious hope stir for the first time in years, sensing that the rigid control Callan had wrapped around the pack might finally begin to loosen. Others grew nervous, uncertain what upheaval might follow if the fragile balance of power shifted too quickly. Damien called a private council meeting the following morning, gathering the pack's senior members in the same hall where he had once condemned Elena. He stood on the same platform, though this time his purpose could not have been more different. 17 years ago, I made a grave mistake, he said, his voice steady, despite the weight of what he was about to admit publicly for the first time. I exiled my Luna, based on evidence I now believe was fabricated. I trusted the wrong wolf, and that trust cost an innocent woman everything. Murmurs rippled through the gathered council. Grace, an elder who had served the pack for decades, rose slowly from her seat, her weathered face carrying decades of careful observation. Many of us suspected as much, Alpha, she said, but few dared speak against Callan Marsh's version of events. His influence reached further than most realized. That influence ends today, Damien said firmly. I am removing Callan from his position as Beta, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into the fabricated evidence used against Elena, and into any other decisions made under his authority these past 17 years. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Several council members nodded in firm agreement, relief plain on their faces. Others exchanged uneasy glances, clearly calculating how the shift might affect alliances they had built with Callan over the years. Callan himself, seated near the back of the hall, rose slowly, his expression carefully neutral, despite the storm Damien could sense building beneath the surface. Alpha, Callan said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, before you act so hastily, perhaps the council should consider all the good I have done for this pack during your periods of distraction these past years. Trade agreements, border security, the stability that allowed Voss territory to remain strong while you struggled with matters of the heart. Stability built on a lie, Damien said sharply. Stability that cost an innocent woman her home, her title, and her safety. An unfortunate necessity, Callan said, and the coldness in his voice finally showed itself fully to the assembled council. Elena was becoming a distraction to your leadership, Alpha, whether you wish to admit it now or not. I did what needed to be done. Gasps spread through the hall. Even the council members who had remained loyal to Callan over the years seemed shaken by the casual admission, the utter lack of remorse in his voice. You just confessed to fabricating evidence against your own Luna, Grace said, her voice sharp with disbelief, in front of the entire council. I confess to protecting this pack, Callan corrected calmly. There is a difference, though I don't expect sentimental fools to understand it. Damien felt fury rise in his chest, hot and immediate, but he forced himself to remain controlled, aware that how he handled this moment would determine the pack's stability for years to come. You are stripped of your title, effective immediately. You will surrender any authority you have accumulated within this pack, and you will face judgment for your actions against Elena and against this territory. Callan's eyes swept across the assembled council, calculating, searching for allies who might still stand with him despite his open confession. Whatever he found in their faces seemed to satisfy him only briefly, before his expression hardened into something far more dangerous. Very well, Alpha, he said, inclining his head with mocking formality. Though I suspect you will come to regret this decision far sooner than you expect. He left the hall without another word, and though several enforcers moved to detain him, Damien raised a hand, allowing him to leave freely for the moment, unwilling to create further chaos within the council chamber. It was a decision he would question in the days that followed, as reports began reaching him of Callan gathering loyal wolves at the territory's western border, wolves who had benefited from his years of unchecked influence and had no intention of surrendering their positions quietly. That evening, Damien stood alone on the balcony overlooking his territory, watching the last light fade behind the mountains, the same mountains that had swallowed Elena's trail 17 years earlier. Grace found him there, her presence quiet and steady, the way it had always been during difficult moments in the pack's history. "You did the right thing today," she said, joining him at the railing. "Did I?" Damien asked, his voice tired in a way that had little to do with physical exhaustion. "Callan is gathering support at the border. The pack is fractured for the first time in decades. And I still have no idea where Elena is, or whether she even survived exile long enough to build a life somewhere far from here. The truth was always going to cost something," Grace said gently. "Better it costs us stability we can rebuild, than costs an innocent woman her life, while we remain comfortable in our ignorance." Damien said nothing for a long moment, watching darkness settle fully over the territory. "I need to find her, Grace, not just for the pack's sake, or to right 17 years of wrong. I need to find her because I loved her, and I threw that love away over lies I should have questioned from the very first moment." "Then find her," Grace said simply. "Send trackers. Send scouts across every territory bordering our own. Someone, somewhere, will remember an exiled Luna passing through 17 years ago. These things leave traces, Damien, even after so much time has passed." The following morning, Damien dispatched his most trusted trackers across every neighboring territory, carrying descriptions of Elena and instructions to report back any information, however small, that might lead toward her current location. He did not know, as he watched them disappear into the surrounding forests, that his search would eventually cross paths, not with Elena directly, but with two young wolves already making their own journey toward Voss territory, carrying 17 years of carefully guarded resentment and an unshakable determination to claim what had been stolen from them before they ever drew their first breath. Meanwhile, at the western border, Callan Marsh gathered the wolves who remained loyal to him, wolves whose positions, wealth, and influence depended entirely on the corrupt systems he had built during his years of unchecked power. He spoke to them quietly, carefully, planting seeds of doubt about Damien's fitness to lead, about the chaos that would surely follow if the pack's stability continued unraveling. "The Alpha grows weak with sentiment," Callan told his gathered supporters, his pale eyes calculating in the dim evening light. "He would sacrifice everything we've built for a woman who abandoned this territory 17 years ago. We cannot allow his guilt to destroy everything we have worked to secure." Among the wolves listening, murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering, though not without hesitation. Callan's confession before the council had unsettled many, even those who had benefited most from his rule. But fear of losing their carefully accumulated positions kept most voices silent, allowing Callan's influence to persist, despite his official removal from power. "What do you propose?" one of the loyal wolves finally asked. Callan's expression settled into something cold and determined. "We wait, we watch, and when the moment comes to reclaim what rightfully belongs to those of us who have earned it, through years of careful work, we act decisively, before Damien's misplaced guilt can undo everything we have built." Far away, unaware of the storm gathering at the edges of the territory they were preparing to enter, Cale and Ronan continued their preparations to leave the only home they had ever known, carrying with them a fierce determination that would soon collide with a pack already fracturing under the weight of 17 years of hidden lies, finally coming undone. Elena knew something had changed the moment Cale and Ronan sat her down by the fire, their faces carrying the particular seriousness that had marked every important conversation in their small family since the twins were old enough to understand the weight of words. "We're leaving for Voss territory," Cale said without preamble, his voice steady, despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "We've decided." For a moment, Elena simply stared at her sons, 17 years of careful protection, colliding with the sudden reality that they had grown into men capable of making decisions entirely their own, decisions she could no longer control or prevent. "No," she said, though even as the word left her mouth, she recognized the futility of it. "Absolutely not. You have no idea what waits for you there. You have no idea what kind of danger." We know exactly what kind of danger, Ronan interrupted gently, though his tone carried none of the softness his words might have suggested. You told us, Mother, every detail, the lies, the beta who orchestrated your downfall, the father who chose those lies over trusting you. We've known for 5 years, and we've spent every one of those years preparing for this moment. Preparing to do what, exactly? Elena asked, her voice rising with fear she could not entirely suppress. Walk into a pack that exiled me, announce yourselves as the sons of a woman they believe betrayed them, and hope for the best? Walk in as the rightful heirs to a throne built on our blood, Cale said, his green eyes fierce in the firelight. Not to beg for acceptance, not to ask a father we've never met to love us, to claim what belongs to us, and to make certain no one within that pack ever mistakes weakness for what we truly are. Elena rose from her seat, pacing the length of the small cabin, her mind racing through every possible outcome, none of them reassuring. Damien exiled me without hesitation, based on lies he never bothered questioning. What makes you think he would treat 2 unclaimed sons any differently, especially sons who arrive as challengers rather than family? We don't need him to treat us kindly, Ronan said quietly. We need him to acknowledge the truth, publicly, before his entire pack. We need the wolves who watched you exiled 17 years ago to understand exactly what was done to you, and exactly who did it. And if Damien refuses to acknowledge any of it, Elena pressed. If he casts you out the same way he cast me out, without a fair hearing, without a moment's consideration? Cale's expression hardened into something almost unrecognizable, a fierce determination that reminded Elena, painfully, of the father her sons had never met. Then we take the throne by right of challenge, and we make certain that pack never suffers under his leadership, or the leadership of anyone loyal to the lies that destroyed you, ever again. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fire between them. Elena studied her sons carefully, seeing for the first time not the small boys she had raised in this quiet settlement, but the powerful young men they had become, shaped by 17 years of careful training and a determination that no amount of maternal worry could now redirect. You've already decided, she said finally, no longer a question. We have, Cale confirmed. We're not asking your permission, Mother. We're telling you out of respect, because you deserve to know before we leave, and because we want you to understand that whatever happens in Voss territory, we're doing this for you as much as for ourselves. Elena felt tears gathering, unwanted and unstoppable. 17 years of careful protection finally giving way to the reality she had always known would eventually arrive. Her sons were not children anymore. They were extraordinary young wolves, strong enough and determined enough to face a throne she herself had once fled in terror, and no amount of maternal fear could hold them back from a path they had clearly spent years preparing to walk. When do you leave? She asked quietly. At first light, Ronan said. Elena nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, forcing herself to accept what she could not change. Then I'm coming with you. Both twins turned to her in surprise, clearly not having anticipated this response. Mother, it's dangerous, Cale began. I lived through that danger once already, Elena said, her voice steadying with each word, the fear in her chest slowly transforming into something closer to fierce resolve. I will not let my sons walk into it alone, not after everything I sacrificed to keep you both safe for 17 years. If you're determined to claim what's rightfully yours, then you'll do it with your mother standing beside you, not hiding in these woods, wondering whether you're alive or dead. Ronan's expression softened slightly, something close to relief passing across his careful features. Cale, ever protective, looked ready to argue further, but something in his mother's steady gaze convinced him the decision was final. Then we leave together, Cale said finally, at first light. Marjorie, who had listened silently from the doorway throughout much of the conversation, stepped forward now, her weathered face carrying 17 years of quiet pride in the family she had helped shelter and raise. I'll gather supplies for the journey, and Elena, when you reach Voss territory, remember that you carry more strength than you realize. You survived exile alone, pregnant, with nothing but your own determination to guide you. You can survive whatever waits for you there now, especially with these 2 extraordinary sons standing beside you. That night, Elena packed carefully, her hands steady despite the storm of emotions churning beneath her calm exterior. She thought of Damien constantly as she prepared, wondering what 17 years had done to the man who had once condemned her so easily, wondering whether any trace remained of the wolf she had loved, before politics and lies destroyed everything between them. But she did not know, as she folded the last of their supplies into worn traveling packs, that Damien's trackers had already begun searching the very territories bordering the settlement she called home, following faint traces of a scent, 17 years old, but never entirely erased. She did not know that within days, two searches, hers moving toward Voss territory and his moving away from it, would inevitably collide, bringing together a family torn apart by lies, and finally, after 17 years of separation, forced to confront the truth that had shattered them all. At dawn, Elena stood at the edge of the settlement with her sons, watching the sun rise over trees that had sheltered them for 17 years. Finn and Marjorie gathered to see them off, along with several other settlement members who had grown fond of the remarkable twins over the years. "Come back to us, whatever happens," Marjorie said, embracing Elena tightly. "We will," Elena promised, though even as she spoke the words, she understood that whatever awaited them in Voss territory would change all three of them irrevocably, regardless of the outcome. Kale and Ronan exchanged a final glance, 17 years of shared purpose settling into quiet, determined resolve. Together, the three of them turned north, toward mountains that had once witnessed Elena's desperate flight into exile, now witnessing her equally desperate, equally determined return. The journey ahead would test everything they had built together in 17 years of careful preparation. But as they walked, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. 17 years of grief and fear, slowly transforming into something closer to purpose. Whatever waited for them in Voss territory, whatever confrontation lay ahead, they would face it together, as a family Damien Voss had never known existed, and one he was about to meet in the most unexpected way imaginable. The journey to Voss territory took 6 days, winding through unfamiliar forests and across 2 rivers swollen with early summer rain. Elena led the way, memory guiding her through paths she had not walked in 17 years, though the landscape had changed enough in that time that she often paused, uncertain, before recognizing some familiar landmark that confirmed they remained on course. Kale and Ronan walked close beside her, alert to every sound in the surrounding forest, their training evident in the careful, coordinated way they moved through unfamiliar terrain. Neither twin spoke much during the journey, each lost in his own thoughts about the confrontation awaiting them at its end, though Elena noticed the subtle ways they checked on her constantly, offering a steadying hand across difficult terrain, or slowing their pace when exhaustion crept into her steps. On the 4th day, danger found them sooner than expected. They had stopped to rest near a shallow stream, when Ronan suddenly went still, his head tilting slightly as he caught a scent carried on the wind. "We're not alone," he said quietly. Kale rose immediately, positioning himself protectively between his mother and the direction Ronan indicated. Elena felt her heart quicken, 17 years of careful peace giving way instantly to old instincts, the sharp awareness of danger that had kept her alive during her original flight from Voss territory. 4 wolves emerged from the tree line moments later, their postures aggressive, their scent unfamiliar to Elena, though something about their bearing suggested organized purpose rather than random encounter. The wolf leading them, broad-shouldered with calculating eyes, studied the small group carefully before speaking. "You're trespassing on territory claimed by Callan Marsh," he said, his voice carrying obvious authority, despite Elena's certainty that Callan held no legitimate claim to any territory at all. "Callan Marsh holds no authority here," Elena said, drawing on years of careful composure despite the danger clearly radiating from the 4 wolves before them. "This land belongs to the Voss pack, under Alpha Damien Voss." Something flickered across the lead wolf's face, brief calculation quickly hidden. "The Alpha's authority is contested at the moment. Callan Marsh has claimed this border region as his own, and we don't take kindly to strangers passing through uninvited." Kale stepped forward slightly, his voice low and controlled, despite the fierce tension radiating from every line of his body. "We're not interested in your territorial disputes. We're passing through, nothing more." "Passing through toward what, exactly?" the lead wolf asked, his eyes narrowing as he studied Kale and Ronan more carefully, something like recognition slowly dawning across his features. You too. You carry a resemblance I've seen before. Alpha Voss's coloring, if I'm not mistaken. Elena's breath caught. She had hoped to reach Voss territory before her son's resemblance to their father drew unwanted attention, but the encounter had clearly revealed truths she had not yet prepared to defend. That's none of your concern, Ronan said sharply, moving to stand beside his brother, presenting a united front that made even the lead wolf's confident posture waver slightly. The four wolves exchanged glances, some silent calculation passing between them before the leader spoke again. Callan will want to know about this. Two young wolves, bearing the alpha's resemblance, traveling with an older woman who speaks with the authority of someone who once held real power here. His eyes settled on Elena with sudden, unsettling clarity. You're her, the exiled Luna. You've come back. We've come back to claim what belongs to us, Kale said, his voice carrying a fierce authority that startled even Elena. 17 years of careful training, crystallizing into something powerful and undeniable in this single, tense moment. And I'd advise you to step aside, unless you're prepared to test exactly how prepared we are to defend that claim. The lead wolf studied Kale for a long, tense moment, clearly weighing the confidence radiating from the young stranger against the numerical advantage his own group still held. Something in Kale's steady, unflinching gaze must have convinced him the confidence was not merely posturing, because after several heavy seconds, he stepped back, gesturing for his companions to do the same. Callan will hear about this regardless, he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. Whatever you're planning, you should know the territory ahead isn't the simple, unified pack you might remember, Luna. Things have changed considerably in 17 years. The four wolves retreated into the tree line, though Elena noticed the way they lingered at the edge of sight, clearly intending to track their movements and report back to whoever commanded their loyalty. She turned to her sons, seeing the fierce determination still burning in both their expressions. That was reckless, she said, though pride mixed uncomfortably with her fear. They could have attacked. They weren't going to attack, Ronan said calmly. They were testing us, gathering information. Whatever conflict exists between your former Beta and Damien, it's clearly still unresolved, and they wanted to understand where we fit into it before committing to anything more serious. Callan Marsh still holds influence here, Elena said, worry creasing her features. That complicates everything. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that 17 years might have resolved whatever ambitions drove him to destroy my life in the first place. Then we'll deal with whatever complications arise, Kale said firmly. We didn't come this far to be frightened away by a former Beta, clinging to whatever power he has left. They continued their journey with heightened caution after the encounter, Elena's mind racing through possibilities she had not previously considered. If Callan still held influence within Voss territory, if the pack remained fractured by whatever conflict the wolves had alluded to, then the confrontation awaiting them at their destination might prove far more complicated than a simple reunion between estranged family members. On the sixth day, they crested a familiar ridge, and Elena stopped abruptly, her breath catching at the sight spreading before them. Voss territory stretched across the valley below, the great stone hall visible even from this distance, exactly as she remembered it, though something in the atmosphere felt different, tense in a way she could not quite name. That's it, she said quietly, her voice carrying 17 years of complicated emotion. That's where it happened, where your father exiled me, in front of the entire pack. Kale and Ronan stood beside her, studying the territory that represented both their birthright and the site of their mother's greatest injustice. Neither spoke for a long moment, each processing the weight of finally seeing, with their own eyes, the place that had shaped their entire lives, despite having never set foot there before. We should approach carefully, Ronan said finally, his strategic mind already working through the possibilities. Word of our presence has likely already reached the territory, given the encounter at the border. They'll be watching for us. Let them watch, Kale said, his voice carrying quiet, fierce confidence. We're not hiding who we are, or why we've come. We're claiming what's ours, in the open, before the entire pack, exactly the way our mother was condemned 17 years ago. There's a certain justice in that. Elena looked at her sons, seeing in their faces a strength and determination that filled her with equal parts pride and terror. Whatever waited for them in the valley below, whatever confrontation with Damien, and whatever remained of Callan's influence, her sons were prepared to face it fully, without hesitation, without fear. "Then let's go," she said, drawing a steadying breath as she looked out over the territory that had once been her home. It's time Voss territory learned exactly what was taken from it 17 years ago, and exactly what has finally come to claim it back. Together, the three of them began their descent into the valley, toward a reunion that would upend everything Damien Voss believed about his own life, his own throne, and the family he never knew he had lost until the very moment they arrived to reclaim it. The gates of Voss territory had never been closed to travelers in all the years Damien had ruled, but the guards stationed there that afternoon straightened immediately when three unfamiliar figures approached from the southern ridge, something about their bearing signaling importance long before their faces became clear. Owen, the young guard who had drawn duty that day, felt his breath catch as the group drew close enough to recognize. Two young men, nearly identical, walked on either side of an older woman, whose face, despite the passage of years, matched a description every guard on this border had memorized, since childhood stories, of the exiled Luna, still circulated through the pack's collective memory. "Alert the Alpha," Owen said quietly to the guard beside him, his eyes never leaving the approaching trio. Tell him Elena has returned." Word spread through Voss territory faster than any messenger could carry it, wolves abandoning their afternoon tasks to gather near the central courtyard, drawn by whispers that seemed too extraordinary to believe. The exiled Luna returned after 17 years, accompanied by two young men who carried an unmistakable resemblance to their Alpha. Damien received the news in his study, where he had spent the morning reviewing reports from trackers, still searching neighboring territories for any trace of Elena. When Owen delivered the message, breathless and wide-eyed, Damien felt his entire body go still, 17 years of careful composure shattering in an instant. "She's here," he said, not quite believing it. "Elena is here, now, at the territory gates?" "Yes, Alpha. And there are two young men with her. They look—" Owen hesitated, clearly uncertain how to phrase what every guard at the gate had already whispered among themselves. "They look like you, Alpha. Very much like you." Damien did not wait to hear more. He moved through the territory at a pace that startled every wolf he passed, his mind racing through possibilities he had considered only in his most desperate, hopeful moments since learning the truth from Nora Bell. Two young men, his resemblance, Elena's final words in the Great Hall 17 years ago, words he had dismissed in his fury but had never quite forgotten. "You will regret this." He reached the central courtyard, just as Elena and her sons entered through the main gate, and the sight of them stopped him completely, every carefully rehearsed thought scattering the moment his eyes found Elena's face across the gathering crowd. She looked different than his memory had preserved her. Older, of course, but carrying a strength and composure that 17 years of hardship had clearly forged rather than diminished. And beside her, two young men who could have been carved from Damien's own reflection at that age, tall and powerfully built, their green eyes, so clearly Elena's, studying him with an intensity that carried none of the warmth a reunion between father and children might have suggested. "Elena," Damien said, her name breaking from him like something he had been holding back for 17 years. "Alpha Voss," Elena replied, her voice carrying a formal coldness that struck him harder than any accusation could have. "I imagine you're surprised to see us." "I've been searching for you," Damien said, moving toward her, before catching himself, aware of the hundreds of pack members gathering to witness this extraordinary reunion. "I learned the truth about the evidence used against you. I learned about Callan Marsh's fabrications. I've spent weeks trying to find you, to make right." 17 years too late, Cale interrupted, his voice cutting through Damien's explanation with sharp, deliberate precision. "You want to know why you're only now learning the truth? Perhaps because you never once questioned the lies that condemned an innocent woman. Perhaps because trusting your beta over your own mate came so easily to you that the truth never had a chance to surface until it suited someone else's timeline." Damien stared at the young man who had spoken, hearing in his voice an anger that felt achingly familiar, a reflection of his own fury directed back at him with devastating precision. "Who are you?" he asked, though some part of him already understood the answer, had understood it from the moment he saw their faces across the courtyard. "My name is Cale," the young man said, his chin lifted with a pride that mirrored Elena's own composure in the Great Hall 17 years earlier. "This is my brother, Ronan. We are your sons, Alpha Voss, born 17 years ago, in exile, to a mother you condemned while she carried us both, though you never gave her the chance to tell you." The courtyard fell into stunned silence, hundreds of pack members processing the revelation together, the weight of 17 years of injustice finally crystallizing into undeniable, living proof standing before them all. Damien felt the ground shift beneath him, the full magnitude of what he had destroyed 17 years ago finally, completely, understood. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he could not fully contain. "Elena, I swear to you, I never knew you were carrying our children. If I had known, if you had known, would you have listened?" Elena asked, her voice steady, despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Or would Callan's lies have carried the same weight regardless, and I simply would have carried our sons into exile, with the added horror of watching you condemn them alongside me?" Damien had no answer to offer, the question striking at the very heart of his failure 17 years ago, a failure of trust so complete that no amount of retroactive good intention could fully undo its damage. Ronan stepped forward now, his quieter presence carrying its own particular weight, as he addressed the gathered crowd. "We have not come seeking your love, or your acceptance as a father who abandoned us before we were born. We have come to claim what belongs to us by blood and by right. Pack law recognizes unclaimed heirs who can prove their strength and worth before the assembled pack. We intend to invoke that right." Murmurs rippled through the courtyard, wolves exchanging uncertain glances as the true purpose of the twins' arrival became clear. This was not simply a family reunion. This was a challenge, formal and undeniable, to the very throne Damien had ruled for over 2 decades. "You wish to challenge my leadership," Damien said slowly, processing the enormity of what his sons were proposing. "We wish to see justice finally served," Cale said. "Whether that justice comes through your voluntary acknowledgement of the wrongs done to our mother, or through formal challenge before this entire pack, matters little to us. What matters is that the truth, finally, cannot be buried or dismissed any longer." Grace, watching from among the assembled council members, stepped forward carefully, her voice carrying the measured authority of decades spent guiding difficult pack decisions. "Pack law does recognize this right, Alpha. Unclaimed heirs who can demonstrate sufficient strength and worth may formally challenge for leadership, particularly under circumstances involving proven injustice against their claimed parent." Damien looked between his sons, seeing in their fierce, determined faces the same stubborn strength that had once drawn him so powerfully to Elena. 17 years distilled into 2 young men who clearly had no intention of accepting anything less than complete acknowledgement of the wrongs committed against their family. "Then let it be done properly," Damien said finally, his voice carrying a heaviness that silenced the remaining murmurs throughout the courtyard. "If my sons wish to prove their claim through the trials our pack law recognizes, I will not stand in their way. But know this." He turned to address Cale and Ronan directly, his voice carrying a sincerity he had not allowed himself to express in 17 years. "Whatever happens in the trials ahead, I have already failed you both, and your mother, in ways I can never fully repay. If proving yourselves before this pack brings you any measure of the justice denied to Elena 17 years ago, then you will find no resistance from me, only the acknowledgement that I should have trusted her from the very beginning." The trials began 3 days later, structured according to ancient pack law that few wolves in the current generation had ever witnessed in practice. Each trial tested a different measure of strength, endurance, and wisdom, designed centuries ago to ensure that any wolf claiming leadership through challenge possessed the full range of qualities necessary to guide a pack through difficult seasons. The first trial tested physical endurance, requiring Cale and Ronan to track and retrieve a marked stone from the far edge of Voss territory before sundown, navigating terrain deliberately chosen for its difficulty. They completed the trial together, their coordination seamless in a way that impressed even the most skeptical council members watching from the sidelines. The second trial tested strategic thinking, presenting the twins with a series of hypothetical pack crises and evaluating their proposed solutions before the full council. Ronan's careful, methodical reasoning impressed the elders considerably, his solutions demonstrating a maturity and wisdom that belied his relatively young age. The third and most demanding trial tested combat skill, a carefully controlled sparring match against Voss territory's most accomplished warriors, structured to demonstrate strength without unnecessary harm to either participant. Kale's fierce determination and years of rigorous training proved more than sufficient, his victories decisive enough that few among the watching pack members retained any doubt about his capability to lead, if challenge ultimately proved necessary. Throughout the trials, Elena watched from among the gathered crowd, pride swelling in her chest as she witnessed her sons demonstrate, publicly and undeniably, everything 17 years of careful preparation had built within them. Whatever happened next, whatever final resolution emerged from this extraordinary confrontation, no one within Voss territory could any longer doubt the strength, wisdom, or legitimate claim these two remarkable young men carried in their blood. And watching from the platform where he had once condemned the woman he loved, Damien felt something shift permanently within him, 17 years of guilt finally giving way to a fierce, unexpected pride in the sons he had never known, and a growing certainty that whatever came next, Voss territory's future belonged, rightfully and completely, to them. That night, after the third trial concluded and the exhausted crowd finally dispersed toward their evening meals, Damien found himself standing outside the guest quarters, where Elena and their sons had been given lodging, uncertain whether he had any right to knock, uncertain what words could possibly bridge 17 years of separation and injustice. He knocked anyway. Elena opened the door, her expression guarded but not entirely closed. 17 years of anger, tempered slightly by the extraordinary events of the past few days. "Damien, may I speak with you?" he asked. "Just for a moment. I understand if you'd rather I leave." Elena hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him into the small sitting room, where a single candle burned against the gathering darkness outside. Kale and Ronan were elsewhere, likely resting after the demanding trials, leaving Damien and Elena alone together, for the first time in 17 years. "I don't know where to begin," Damien admitted, standing awkwardly near the doorway, all the careful authority of alpha leadership seeming to desert him entirely in this quiet, private moment. 17 years of things I should have said, and I don't know which words could possibly matter now. "Try the truth," Elena said simply, settling into a chair near the small fireplace, her posture guarded, but her eyes steady on his face. "You've never actually offered me that, not 17 years ago, and not fully since I arrived 3 days past." Damien nodded slowly, drawing a difficult breath before continuing. "I loved you completely, Elena, more than I ever admitted, even to myself, in the 2 years we were together. And when Callan brought that evidence to me, I chose to believe it instantly, without questioning it, without giving you the fair hearing you deserved. I told myself I was protecting the pack. In truth, I think I was protecting myself from the vulnerability of loving someone as completely as I loved you. It was easier to believe the worst than to sit with how much your betrayal, real or fabricated, would have destroyed me." Elena studied him for a long moment, 17 years of carefully guarded pain visible beneath her composed exterior. "Do you understand what that choice cost me? I gave birth alone, in a stranger's cabin, surrounded by people who owed me nothing, yet gave me everything you refused to offer. I raised 2 extraordinary sons, without a single day of support from the man who claimed to love me completely. I lived every day wondering if enforcers loyal to you might find us, might finish what your exile started. I understand it now," Damien said quietly. "I understood none of it 17 years ago, and that failure to understand, to question, to trust you even slightly, is a wound I will carry for the rest of my life, regardless of anything that happens between us going forward." "What do you want from me, Damien?" Elena asked, exhaustion creeping into her voice despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Forgiveness? Reconciliation? I don't know if either is possible after everything that's happened." "I don't expect either," Damien said honestly. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, not after what I've cost you. I only wanted you to hear the truth, spoken plainly, without the crowds or the formal proceedings surrounding our son's trials. I am sorry, Elena. More sorry than I have words to properly express." Elena's composure wavered slightly. 17 years of carefully suppressed grief threatening to surface, despite her efforts to remain strong. "I spent so long hating you," she admitted quietly. "It was easier than grieving what we lost. Hatred gave me purpose, something solid to hold on to while I rebuilt an entire life from nothing." "And now?" Damien asked carefully. Now I mostly just feel tired, Elena said. Tired of carrying anger that has protected me for 17 years, but never quite healed the wound underneath it. I don't know what I feel toward you anymore, Damien. Perhaps I need time to figure that out, separate from everything happening with our sons and this pack. Damien nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words even as disappointment settled heavily in his chest. Take whatever time you need. I won't push you toward anything you're not ready for. I only hope, eventually, there might be room for something between us, beyond 17 years of grief and anger. Before Elena could respond, urgent footsteps sounded in the corridor outside, and moments later, Grace appeared at the doorway, her weathered face carrying an alarm that immediately shifted the entire atmosphere of the room. Alpha, she said, breathless from hurrying through the territory. Scouts report movement at the western border. Callan Marsh has gathered a significant force. Wolves, loyal to him from the years of his unchecked influence. They're moving toward the territory now. Damien felt his blood run cold. 17 years of careful pack management colliding suddenly with the consequences of confronting Callan's corruption too openly, too quickly, without fully accounting for the alliances he had built during years of unchecked authority. How many? He asked sharply. Reports suggest 20, perhaps 30 wolves, Grace said. All wolves who benefited directly from Callan's arrangements over the years. They won't easily surrender the positions and privileges they've built under his influence. Elena rose from her chair immediately, her earlier exhaustion giving way to sharp, focused alertness. This is my fault. If I hadn't returned, if our sons hadn't challenged your leadership so publicly. This is Callan's fault, Damien interrupted firmly. Every consequence flowing from his 17 years of fabricated lies and unchecked ambition belongs to him alone, not to you, and not to our sons, for finally demanding the justice they deserve. Cale and Ronan appeared in the doorway moments later, drawn by the urgency evident in the gathered voices, their expressions immediately sharpening as they absorbed the situation unfolding before them. We're prepared to defend this territory, Cale said without hesitation, his earlier fierce determination now channeled toward a threat that extended beyond their own personal claims into genuine danger for the pack they had come to challenge. This isn't your fight, Damien said, though he recognized, even as he spoke the words, how little authority he now held to direct his sons' choices after 17 years of complete absence from their lives. It became our fight the moment we arrived, Ronan said calmly. Whatever conflict exists between you and Callan Marsh, our presence here clearly accelerated its arrival. We won't hide from the consequences of our own choices. Damien looked between Elena and their sons, 17 years of separation, somehow collapsing into a single, urgent moment, where the family he had never known he possessed now stood ready to defend a territory that, until 3 days ago, had never acknowledged their existence at all. Then we face this together, he said finally, something settling into place within him that felt, for the first time in 17 years, like the beginnings of genuine family, rather than fractured strangers, connected only by blood and grievance. Whatever Callan intends, we meet it united, or we don't meet it at all. Grace nodded firmly, already moving to organize the pack's defenses, calling for enforcers to gather at the territory's central hall for urgent instruction. Outside, the last light of evening faded rapidly toward darkness, and somewhere beyond the western border, Callan Marsh led his gathered forces steadily closer. 17 years of carefully hidden ambition, finally moving toward its inevitable, decisive confrontation. Voss territory transformed within hours, from a place of careful reconciliation into one of urgent preparation. Enforcers gathered supplies and organized defensive positions along the central hall's approach, while Grace worked alongside Damien to identify which council members remained loyal and which might still harbor sympathies toward Callan's years of unchecked influence. Elena found herself drawn into the preparations, despite 17 years away from pack leadership, her instincts for organization and calm decision-making returning as though she had never left. She moved through the gathering wolves, offering steady reassurance to those frightened by the sudden threat, drawing on skills she had honed during her years managing the outcast settlement's own occasional crises. You still know how to lead, Damien observed quietly, finding her organizing supplies near the central hall as evening deepened into full darkness. I never stopped leading, Elena replied, not looking up from her work. I simply led a different kind of community these past 17 years. The skills transfer more easily than you might expect. Kale and Ronan, meanwhile, worked with the pack's most experienced enforcers, coordinating defensive strategy with a competence that continued to impress even the most skeptical among Voss territory's warriors. Ronan's strategic mind proved particularly valuable, identifying weaknesses in the territory's usual defensive arrangements and suggesting adjustments that even seasoned enforcers acknowledged as improvements. "Callan will expect us unprepared," Ronan explained to the assembled defenders. 17 years of unchecked influence has likely convinced him this pack remains as passive and easily controlled as it was during his years of hidden authority. We should use that assumption against him. By the time scouts reported Callan's forces approaching the territory's edge, Voss pack had organized a defense far more sophisticated than anything the former Beta likely anticipated. Damien stood at the front of the gathered defenders, Elena beside him, their sons flanking them both, presenting a unified front that carried its own powerful symbolism, regardless of whatever conflict lay ahead. Callan emerged from the tree line as darkness fully settled over the territory, flanked by roughly 30 wolves, whose expressions ranged from fierce determination to visible uncertainty. He studied the assembled defenders with calculating eyes, clearly recalculating whatever plan he had formulated, based on outdated assumptions about the pack's readiness. "Damien," Callan called, his voice carrying easily across the tense distance separating the two groups. "I see you've rallied quite the defense, though I notice your newfound family standing rather prominently among your ranks. How touching that 17 years of separation could be so quickly forgotten." "Your influence here ends tonight, Callan," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying the authority he had spent 17 years failing to fully claim during Callan's quiet manipulation of pack affairs. "Whatever loyalty you've purchased from these wolves through years of unfair privilege, it ends now, in front of the truth you tried so desperately to bury." Callan's expression flickered with something between amusement and calculation. "The truth, Alpha? Let's speak plainly about truth then. The truth is that I built this pack's stability, while you drowned in grief over a mate you convinced yourself had betrayed you. The truth is that every wolf standing behind me owes their comfortable position, their secure future, to arrangements I carefully constructed during years when you could barely function as a leader at all." Murmurs rippled through the wolves gathered behind Callan, some nodding in evident agreement, others shifting uncomfortably as the weight of the confrontation settled more heavily upon them. Elena stepped forward then, her voice carrying across the tense gathering with a steadiness that 17 years of hardship had forged into something formidable. "The truth, Callan Marsh, is that you fabricated evidence to destroy an innocent woman's life because I represented an obstacle to the influence you wanted to build over this pack. The truth is that you separated a father from his sons for 17 years through nothing but calculated lies. Whatever stability you claim to have built, it was constructed on a foundation of deliberate cruelty, and foundations like that eventually collapse." "Careful, exiled Luna," Callan said, though something in his confident posture had begun to waver slightly, under the combined weight of Elena's composed accusation, and the visible uncertainty spreading through his own gathered wolves. "You speak boldly for someone who spent 17 years hiding in the wilderness." "I didn't hide," Elena said. "I survived. I raised 2 extraordinary sons, despite everything you took from us, and now, those sons stand ready to reclaim what belongs to them by right, regardless of whatever forces you've gathered to prevent it." Kale stepped forward beside his mother, his voice carrying fierce, unwavering authority, despite his young age. "Every wolf standing behind you, Callan Marsh, has a choice tonight. Continue defending a man who confessed openly, before the entire council, to fabricating evidence against an innocent Luna, or recognize that whatever privileges you've offered them come at a cost far greater than any of you likely realized when you accepted his arrangements." The wolves behind Callan exchanged uneasy glances, the confident unity that had carried them toward the territory beginning visibly to fracture under the combined weight of Elena's composure, Kale's fierce authority, and the simple, undeniable truth of Callan's own confession, witnessed weeks earlier by the entire pack council. One wolf, older and clearly troubled by the unfolding confrontation, finally stepped forward from among Callan's gathered forces. "Is it true?" he asked, addressing Callan directly. "Did you truly confess to fabricating evidence against the Luna before the full council?" Callan's expression tightened, calculation flickering rapidly behind his pale eyes, as he recognized the dangerous shift occurring within his own ranks. I did what was necessary for this pack's stability, nothing more. That's not an answer, the older wolf pressed, his voice carrying growing unease. I followed you these past weeks, because you promised to protect the arrangements that secured my family's well-being. I did not agree to march against an alpha over lies you told to destroy an innocent woman and her unborn children. Other wolves began murmuring similar concerns, the unified force Callan had gathered fracturing rapidly, as the weight of his own confession, spoken openly weeks earlier, finally caught up with the loyalty he had spent years carefully purchasing through favors and privileges. This changes nothing, Callan snapped, though desperation had begun creeping into his voice for the first time. We came here to secure our futures against an alpha, too weak and sentimental to lead effectively. That threat remains regardless of ancient history. Ancient history? Ronan spoke now, his quiet, measured voice somehow cutting through the growing chaos, more effectively than any raised shout could have managed. You call the deliberate destruction of an innocent family ancient history? You confess to it yourself, Callan Marsh, before witnesses who still remember every word. There is no version of tonight's confrontation where that truth simply disappears because you find it inconvenient. The older wolf who had first questioned Callan's authority turned fully away now, lowering his head toward Damien in a gesture of clear submission. I withdraw my support from this challenge, Alpha. Whatever privileges I once valued, I will not defend a wolf who destroyed an innocent family through deliberate lies. One by one, other wolves within Callan's gathered force began following the same path, stepping back, lowering their heads, withdrawing their support, as the truth of Callan's confession settled fully into their understanding. Within minutes, the formidable force that had approached Voss territory with such confident purpose had dwindled to a handful of wolves still standing beside Callan, their expressions carrying uncertain desperation, rather than the fierce determination that had characterized their earlier approach. Callan stared at the rapidly diminishing support surrounding him, his calculating composure finally cracking under the visible reality of his collapsing influence. This isn't finished, he said, though his voice carried little conviction now. You think reclaiming a throne through sentiment and confession undoes 17 years of careful work? I built this pack's stability, while all of you built nothing but suffering, Elena interrupted firmly, her voice carrying across the now largely empty space where Callan's forces had stood only minutes earlier. And tonight, that suffering finally ends. Damien moved forward then, flanked by his sons, his voice carrying the full authority of an alpha who had finally, completely, reclaimed his rightful leadership. Callan Marsh, you are formally charged with fabricating evidence against your Luna, with orchestrating her wrongful exile, and with attempting insurrection against your rightful alpha tonight. You will face judgment before the full Pack Council, and you will answer, completely, for 17 years of deliberate cruelty. Callan looked around at the handful of wolves still remaining beside him, recognizing finally that his carefully constructed influence had collapsed entirely, under the weight of truth he could no longer suppress or deny. Whatever fight remained in him seemed to drain away in that moment, replaced by the exhausted resignation of a man who understood, completely, that his 17 years of hidden manipulation had finally reached their inevitable, undeniable end. The enforcers moved forward to take him into custody, and as they did, Elena felt something powerful settle within her chest. 17 years of careful survival, finally giving way to something that felt, unmistakably, like justice long delayed but finally, completely, achieved. Callan Marsh's formal judgment took place 3 days later, before the same full Pack Council that had once listened to his confident, calculated confession without fully understanding its consequences. This time, every wolf in attendance understood exactly what was at stake, and exactly what 17 years of hidden manipulation had cost the pack, and the family he had so deliberately torn apart. The council's decision was swift and unanimous. Callan was stripped permanently of any standing within Voss territory, and exiled beyond its borders, forbidden ever to return. His years of carefully accumulated influence dissolved entirely by the truth he could no longer suppress. He left the territory quietly, without the dramatic defiance he had shown during his failed insurrection, a man finally forced to reckon with the complete collapse of everything he had built through deliberate cruelty. With Callan's threat resolved, Voss territory turned its attention toward a different kind of reckoning, one considerably more complicated than formal judgment against a clear wrongdoer. Damien called a private meeting with Elena and their sons, gathering in the same study where he had first learned the devastating truth from Nora Bell weeks earlier. "The Pack Council has asked me to formally address the question of succession," Damien said, choosing his words carefully as he studied the three people whose lives he had so thoroughly disrupted 17 years earlier. "Given everything that has happened, given the trials you both completed so impressively, and given the wrongs done to your mother that this pack must properly acknowledge, I believe the throne belongs to you both, not to me." Cale and Ronan exchanged a glance, 17 years of shared purpose passing silently between them, before Ronan spoke. "You would step down entirely?" "I have spent 17 years leading this pack while carrying guilt I refused to properly examine," Damien said honestly. "I destroyed the woman I loved and denied my own sons their rightful place in this family, all because I trusted the wrong wolf over the right one. I don't believe I deserve to continue holding this throne simply because tradition suggests an alpha rules until death or formal challenge. You have both proven, through the trials and through tonight's confrontation with Callan, that you possess exactly the strength, wisdom, and integrity this pack deserves in its leadership." Elena watched this exchange carefully, 17 years of complicated emotion settling into something that felt, for the first time since her exile, close to genuine peace. "What do you want, Damien? Beyond stepping aside for our sons?" Damien considered the question seriously before answering. "I want the chance to earn back some measure of the trust I destroyed 17 years ago, not as alpha, necessarily, but as a father who failed his sons before they ever drew breath, and as a mate who failed the woman who deserved so much better from him. I don't expect that trust to return quickly, or perhaps ever fully, but I would like the chance to try, if you're willing to allow it." Cale, whose fierce protectiveness had driven much of the family's journey toward this moment, studied his father carefully. 17 years of carefully guarded resentment, slowly giving way to something more complicated. "Ronan and I discussed this possibility during our journey here," he admitted. "We agreed that ruling jointly made more sense than either of us claiming sole leadership, particularly given how much we still have to learn about governing a pack this size. And regarding you," Ronan added, addressing Damien directly, "we agreed that vengeance was never truly our goal. Justice, yes. Acknowledgement of what was done to our mother, absolutely. But destroying you entirely would accomplish nothing beyond satisfying an anger that has already cost this family 17 years it can never fully recover." Damien felt something loosen in his chest, relief and gratitude mixing with an emotion he had not expected to feel again after everything his failures had cost this family. "Then what do you propose?" "Cale and I will rule jointly, as you suggested," Ronan said. "But we would like you to remain within this pack, in whatever capacity proves useful, as we learn to lead effectively. Not as alpha, but perhaps as an advisor, someone whose experience, however flawed, can still guide us through the complicated realities of pack governance." "And our mother," Cale added, his voice softening slightly as he glanced toward Elena, "deserves to be formally recognized before this entire pack as the wrongfully exiled Luna she always was. Whatever role she chooses to accept going forward, that recognition is non-negotiable." Elena felt tears gather unexpectedly at her son's fierce protectiveness, 17 years of careful strength, finally allowing itself a moment of genuine emotional release. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for understanding exactly what matters most in all of this." The formal ceremony took place 1 week later, in the same great hall where Elena's exile had begun 17 years earlier. This time, the hall overflowed with pack members, eager to witness not condemnation, but restoration, the righting of a wrong that had haunted Voss territory's collective conscience for nearly 2 decades. Damien stood before the assembled pack, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. 17 years ago, in this very hall, I condemned an innocent woman, based on lies I never properly questioned. Today, I stand before you to formally acknowledge that wrong, to restore Elena's rightful place as the wronged Luna of this pack, and to present our sons, Cale and Ronan, as the rightful joint heirs to Voss territory's leadership, earned through trials this council witnessed personally, and through strength and wisdom that 17 years of hardship could not diminish but only sharpen. Elena stepped forward then, standing where she had once knelt in desperate, futile defense of her innocence, though this time she stood tall, surrounded by the family that had survived everything 17 years of injustice had thrown against them. The Pack Council formally restored her title, not as Luna to a ruling alpha, but as an honored elder whose wisdom and survival had ultimately shaped the very leadership now taking hold of Voss territory's future. Kale and Ronan accepted the Pack's formal recognition together, their joint leadership symbolized by matching ceremonial markings that acknowledged their shared claim to the throne their mother's exile had once seemed to permanently deny them. The Pack that had once witnessed Elena's devastating condemnation now witnessed instead a restoration 17 years in the making, proof that truth, however long delayed, eventually found its way into the light. In the months that followed, Voss territory slowly healed from the wounds Callan's years of hidden manipulation had inflicted. Kale and Ronan proved themselves capable, thoughtful leaders. Kale's fierce protectiveness balanced perfectly by Ronan's careful strategic wisdom, creating a leadership partnership that many within the Pack came to view as stronger than any single alpha could have provided alone. Damien remained within the territory, exactly as his sons had proposed, offering guidance when asked and stepping back when his input was not needed, slowly rebuilding fragments of trust with both his sons and Elena through patient, consistent effort, rather than grand gestures or desperate pleas for forgiveness. Elena watched this transformation carefully, neither rushing toward reconciliation, nor entirely closing the door on whatever might eventually grow between them, allowing herself the time she had told him, that first night in the guest quarters, that she needed to properly heal. On quiet evenings, she often found herself walking the same territory she had once fled in desperate exile, watching her sons grow into the leaders their birthright had always promised, watching Damien slowly become someone worthy of the trust he had so completely destroyed 17 years earlier. The pain of those lost years never fully disappeared, but it settled, over time, into something she could carry without it defining every remaining day of her life. Marjorie and Finn visited occasionally from the settlement that had sheltered Elena through her darkest days, marveling at the transformation their extraordinary friend and her remarkable sons had achieved. "You built something powerful from nothing," Marjorie told her during one such visit, watching Kale and Ronan address Pack matters with the same fierce competence that had first impressed her when they were merely determined children training in a settlement clearing. "We built it together," Elena corrected gently. "All of us. Even the years of hardship taught lessons that ultimately made us stronger than comfort ever could have." 17 years after a devastating false accusation tore apart an entire family, Voss territory stood transformed, led by two extraordinary sons who had claimed their birthright not through vengeance, but through unwavering strength, careful wisdom, and an unshakable commitment to the truth their mother had protected, at tremendous personal cost. The throne that had once been stolen through lies had finally, completely, been reclaimed through justice, proving that even the deepest wounds, given enough time and enough courage, could ultimately heal into something stronger than they had ever been before.